And this morning we're going to be looking at the diagnosis of a wound. The diagnosis of a wound. I'll be reading two portions of Scripture. The first found in Psalms 109 and 22. The second found in Proverbs 18 and 14, if you want to turn there. Psalms 109 and 22, "For I am poor and needy, and my heart is wounded within me." That's David writing these words. "And my heart is wounded within me." Proverbs 18 and 14, "The spirit of a man will sustain his infirmity." In other words, when we are plagued by physical ailments, we can still be of good spirits and all. We can handle that cold, that flu, and even many other things that come our way. But the last portion of this scripture says, "But a wounded spirit who can bear?" A wounded spirit, a wounded heart, that what hits you down deep inside, who can bear that? When we talk about the diagnosis of a wound, we're talking about what a wound is. A wound is something that's been inflicted because of a word or action, or I should say words or actions, that emotionally pierce the heart of a person and hinders them from becoming everything that they were meant to be. That's the definition that came to my mind when I thought about a wound. Actions and words that hurt us emotionally. You've often heard the saying, "Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me." I mean, no, that's a lie. Sticks and stones, they do break the bones, and words do hurt. In fact, words hurt more than sticks and stones. I don't know about you. There have been times when I'd rather have been hit than been said the things that have been said to me. And I'm sure you have all experienced times like that yourself. When people are wounded, when people have been wounded, and let me tell you something right now. Everyone has been wounded. We are all susceptible to wounds. We all have wounds of different types because we are born in sin and shapen in iniquity. Psalms 51 and 5 says, "Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." If we were born perfect, we would have no needs. And having no needs, we could not be wounded. But because we are born imperfect, we have needs. And because we have needs, we have the potential to be wounded. We're vulnerable to that. Because when we say we have needs, all of us have needs. We have to admit that. We have the need to be loved. We have the need to be accepted. We have the need for self-esteem. We have the need to be felt that we're worthy. Need of worthiness, of approval. As a man, we have a need to have our masculinity affirmed. As a woman, you have a need to have your femininity affirmed in your life. We want to feel like our parents are proud of us. We want to feel that people that we love and care about feel the same way about us. And when there are words and actions that are done that do not do those things for us, do not affirm us, that do not validate us, they do not show that love and that caring for us, it causes a wound. And that wound is amplified, especially if it cuts deep. For instance, if you have that need, and we all do, the need for love, and that need is not shown, that hurts. That love is not shown to us by those around us, it really hurts. But if it goes a step further and they say, "I hate you," you see, it's even a deeper wound. That's a word or a deed. Now, as I share these things, the only way I can do it so that you will understand what I'm sharing with you is I'll have to be very transparent in my own life and share with you some wounds that I've lived with. And part of the reason for this series that we're doing on healing the wounded heart is because I've noticed some things in me, some wounds that I have been carrying for many, many years. You see, the thing about a wound is most of us have been wounded when we were small, when we were children. I think of two primary wounds that affected me. One wound was the absence of my father. It was not an intentional thing. My father died when I was 6 years old. My mother never remarried. And though it was something that he had no control over, and he did not desert us, there was not a divorce involved, and those cause wounds also, very, very detrimental wounds. But just the absence of the father, and the lack of having a male figure to look up to, and the lack of the validation of my masculinity and my manhood from my father not being there, made me vulnerable to other wounds. You understand what I'm saying? As we recognize this and look at these things, we realize there are so many things that play a part in making us who we are, and causing us to be strong, and causing us to be a person that's well-rounded and has a fullness of life and a wholeness within our lives. You've heard me tell the story before of when I was in 5th grade, the young girl that I was in love with, my first love. I think every one of us can remember our first love, that first little girl or little boy that we thought the world of. And how one day in class she turned to me after someone had hit her in the back of the head with a piece of paper. It came from the back of the class, but I was sitting right behind her, and she just assumed that it was me and turned and said, "You're the ugliest thing I've ever seen." That wounded me. A wound that stayed with me and is still with me, that I still think about, that still affects the way that I see things. Even when people give me compliments, it's always filtered through those words I heard said by someone at the time when I was vulnerable as a child, when you're needing to be validated, when you're in that awkward stage. You know what I'm talking about? That awkward stage in life as a child, and so many things happening, and you need validation, and you need someone to believe in you and all that. Not to have that. And to have someone that you esteem highly and someone that you think is perfect and wonderful to say something harsh and hateful to you, it wounds you deeply. And here I am, 40-something years later, and those things still are in my heart, and I still have to deal with them. To the point that no matter what is said, it's filtered through that wound. That even though someone may say a compliment to me, it still irritates that wound that's there because it's never been healed. My wife will say to me, like, come into church, say, "You look handsome." But I can't just accept it and receive it and say thank you and be happy about it. Because when she makes a compliment like that, or if anybody makes a compliment like that to me, it's in that category where I'm wounded. And that wound has never been healed. So it irritates it. It brings back the memories. And I think, well, she has to say that. She's my wife. Or she's saying that out of sympathy because I look so bad. She's just trying to say something to make me feel better because she must realize how bad I feel about myself. You see what I'm saying? That's what wounds do. They don't allow you to accept those things. You don't perceive those things like you should. Psycho-Cybernetics, a book that was written, I believe, by a plastic surgeon who helped people who had deformities. And he would reconstruct their face and make them beautiful. You know, he would change their faces and take away the deformities that they were born with so that they wouldn't be embarrassed anymore, because all their lives they've been hearing, "Mommy, look at that woman, she's funny looking," or "Mommy, look at that lady, she's ugly," and all those things that they hear and all. And this doctor was helping these people and doing these surgeries and making their face to be normal. And he says some of them came out so beautiful, but yet it didn't change the way they felt about themselves. Because he healed that part of it. But he didn't heal the wound that was in their heart from the things that had been said and the actions that had been done against them. They still saw themselves the same way. No matter what was said to them, it always had to be filtered through the wound. It always aggravated the wound. Because a wound, when it doesn't heal, can be easily aggravated, can't it? Even when you try to soothe it with something good, it still aggravates it. How many times has a child gotten a scrape or something and you want to put something on it that's going to make it feel better? But a lot of times in order to make it feel better, it first irritates it. It hurts. So you want to move away from it. You go, no, don't touch it. I mean, you even come near that little cut and scrape on their leg or on their knee. I mean, my girls did the same thing. No, it's going to hurt. Haven't even touched them yet. But see, we tend to do that when we have wounds. We don't want anything touching it. So as we grow up with these wounds, we find that there are so many things in life that continue to irritate the wounds. And they're wounds until they're healed. All are wounded because we're all vulnerable to wounds. Because we all have needs. Most of us have been wounded, and just about all have been wounded when we were young, by a divorce, by an absent father, by contention within the family, through the lack of validation from the father. And most of what I've read, I've found that most children have been wounded by their fathers in one way or another. And not necessarily intentionally. Sometimes that has happened because of abuse. But sometimes it's just the lack of saying, I love you. The lack of showing that person validation, especially a son. Did you know that both the females and the males, both the boys and girls, get their masculinity or femininity from their father? Not from their mother, from their father. Study after study has been done. And a boy gets his masculinity by his father, by the way he sees his father act, and by the way his father reacts to him. The way that he treats him, the way that he affirms him, in the same way with his daughters. Because he treats his daughters a different way than he treats his sons. Not that he loves them different, but the way that he reacts to them. It affirms their femininity. And we all need that affirmed in our lives. And because it's not being affirmed, we have people today that are confused about their sexuality. They're confused about those things because they have certain needs that have not been affirmed, or they were abused when they were young. And that wounds them to the point that they're trying to get affirmation that they do need. It's a true need, but they're trying to attain it in the wrong way. And so we have people that are walking around wounded by things that have been said, things that have been done. And some of the symptoms that we see because of those wounds are anger, violence, addictions, broken relationships, people that are in and out of relationships, and all these things, because in relationships especially, you're going to always have that friction there, things that happen that if there is a wound, it will be irritated. If there is a wound in your life, there will always be something that's going to affect it. There's always going to be something that's going to irritate it, especially in relationships. Whether it be a marital relationship, a family relationship, a church relationship, there will always be something there that irritates it. We're all wounded. Most of us, if not all of us, have been wounded when we were young. Most of us have learned to live with our wounds because we've come to the place where we don't believe they can be healed. Many look to see those wounds healed by their husbands or by their wives, only to find them even more irritated and wounded. If a man needs to be validated, many times if he has not received it from his father, he will look to receive it from that woman in his life. And if he doesn't receive it there, the wound continues. And even if he does, because the wound is there, see, she can't heal the wound that his father has placed there. She can't do it. She can do all that she can. She can affirm him. She can say, "You're a manly man." She can say all those things to him, but it's not going to heal that wound. Actually, the only one that can heal that wound is the father himself, or the one that caused the wound, by coming to them and telling them, I shouldn't have said this or whatever, and ask forgiveness and then affirm them and validate them. But many times that doesn't happen because so many today who have wounds, that person that wounded them is no longer around. And the closer that person was to you, the deeper the wound goes. If you have esteemed that person highly in your life and they wound you, that wound goes deep. When you're wounded by your mother and father, they go deep. When you're wounded by someone that you've esteemed highly, that you looked up to, that you thought the world of, you had confidence in, that you trusted, when they wound you, it goes deep. So we tend to look to other things to heal those wounds. And men go into marriages thinking, well, my wife will validate me. She'll make me feel like a man. She'll make me feel, and the woman the same way. He'll give me what my father didn't give me. He'll whatever. And it doesn't work. Because they can't heal that wound. So what tends to happen? We become angry and frustrated because that person is not helping us to heal something they did not cause, because the person that caused it is no longer around or will not do anything to heal that wound. And then there are those that are always crying out, trying to get that person to heal that wound. They're trying to do, so men will and women will apply themselves to be successful and do this, do that, anything to get the approval of their parents, to get the affirmation of those that they love, to get that. And so many times it still won't come. So they live a life of frustration, attempting to do something that will finally get their attention. They'll say, I'm proud of you, son, or I'm proud of you, daughter. And for so many, that never happens. So what do you do? Well, many just learn to become part of the walking wounded. And I don't want to go a lot into that because we'll be dealing with that next time. But I wanted to look at the diagnosis of a wound, the things that cause it, why they're there, why we're vulnerable and susceptible to wounds, and how they are there, not by our fault, by the things that were done or said and actions to us. Sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional. But we need to recognize them. And I want to say this now, and I'll probably say it later. I want to emphasize the fact that the first step to healing the wounded heart is recognizing you're wounded. The first step to being healed of a wounded heart is recognize that you are wounded. See, so many people want to ignore it. They want to say, it doesn't matter. Many men want to put it aside. Hey, I can make it through this. The mentality of ball players who play with broken ankles and cracked ribs and all of that. Because, you got to be tough. You just ignore the pain. You ignore the wound. Maybe it won't heal, but if you push it far enough away, then, you can just forget about it. But let me tell you something. Wounds cannot be forgotten about. Because it seems like things are drawn to it. Like my foot that I mentioned that was hurt. It seems like when you have a part of you that's hurt, it always seems to get in trouble. It's that toe you stub all the time. It's that someone steps on that foot. Why couldn't they step on the other foot? Whatever it may be, suddenly everything seems to be attracted to that wound. And that's not necessarily true. It's just that you don't notice it on the other side because there's no pain there. You notice it where you're sensitive. You notice it where you're wounded. And so we tend to try to hide the wound, to cover it up, to ignore it, to pretend it's not there. Psalms 38, 4 through 10, I think is a great description of someone with a wound. Let me read it. For mine iniquities are gone over mine head. As a heavy burden, they are too heavy for me. My wounds stink and are corrupt because of my foolishness. I am troubled. I am bowed down greatly. I go mourning all the day long, for my loins are filled with a loathsome disease, and there is no soundness in my flesh. I am feeble and sore broken. I have roared by reason of my disquietness of my heart. Lord, all my desire is before Thee, and my groaning is not hid from Thee. My heart panteth, my strength faileth me. As for the light of mine eyes, it also is gone from me. I think that's an adequate description of someone with a wound. It makes you feel lousy about yourself, about your possibilities. It makes you feel ill at times physically. It tarnishes so many things in your life. It affects your perception of things. It causes you to see things differently than you should. Because like I said, everything that happens is filtered through that wound. So it makes it hard for you to receive. I have seen people in churches that I've preached that I know God is speaking to, trying to get through to them with His love and His goodness. But because they've been wounded by their natural father, it's hard for them to believe a spiritual father could ever love them, could ever care about them, could feel like God feels about them, that they're not sure about it. They're afraid to accept it. They're afraid it's just going to hurt more. They're afraid to open their heart to it, because what if He turns around and wounds me like the last person I let in? So many wounded people. Women wounded by divorce. Men wounded by divorce. By desertion. Wounded by spouses, abused. All different kinds of things that are done and that happen. Wounds that we continue to carry, that affect us, that frustrate us, that anger us, that make us to respond. If you were to find any person in this world today, I believe, that has any kind of addiction, and really investigate, you'll find somewhere back in their history a wound. A wound that drove them to where they are now. Because they're trying to somehow be able to deal with the wound, to somehow deaden the wound, to deaden the pain, like someone who takes some kind of a painkiller because they've been operated on, or they have some kind of pain in their body and the doctor prescribes something. We try to find those things to touch the emotional part of our hearts. There are people that are on medications, not because they're physically ill, but because they're emotionally ill. Because they're wounded. We are living today in a society that there are more antidepressants being distributed than ever before. To children, young people, adults. It's amazing to me how many people are on some kind of antidepressant. Prozac or whatever it may be, all these different ones that are on the market. And many of them are in the church. And please, if you're here this morning and you're in that situation, I am no way trying to condemn you. Sometimes those things are needful to help you to cope now. But I'm here to tell you there is healing in Christ Jesus. That we don't have to live with the wounds. There is a healer of wounds. There is one that can heal those wounds no matter who made them, no matter how old they are, no matter how stinky they are, no matter what there is about them. He is able to heal the wounds. It's a hard thing at times to uncover. If the first step to healing is admitting that we're wounded, it means the willingness to expose that wound, to say it is here. The wound's right here. I am angry at my father. I am angry at my ex-husband. I am angry at my ex-wife. I am angry at this person or that person. This person that abused me when I was a child. This person that said these things to me. It did cause a wound. See, we like to believe we're strong enough and tough enough that nobody could hurt us. But we're already hurt. We were born with a propensity to be hurt. We were born vulnerable to those hurts. Because we were born in sin and shapen in iniquity. And it affects our responses. It affects our relationships. It affects everything that we do and everything that we are. And so we respond in negative ways to positive things. That confuses people. That confuses our wives. That confuses our husbands. Confuses our parents. Confuses our children. When they say something in jest to their parent, to their father or mother about something, and they get this response of, it's like, whoa, 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 what's wrong? You hit a wound. You see, in jest, you said something that maybe our parents used to say to us when we were young. You'll never be any good. You'll be a rotten parent. Whatever it may be. And then someone around it, someone says it, and it's like to them it was nothing, but to you it's a knife that just digs right back into that wound again and exposes everything that was there before. And you're angered that someone would mess with your wound. And you respond in negative ways. The other night I said some things to my wife in the wrong attitude and spirit. They were hurtful things. I'm ashamed to have to admit that. But I'm not perfect either. And the reason why these kinds of subjects aren't addressed enough is because when to address them, you have to be willing to admit you've got wounds of your own. Because until those who teach this are willing to become vulnerable, those who hear it won't respond to it. And after I vented, God spoke to my heart. It's amazing that God would even speak to me at a time like that. And I got up from my bed and went downstairs and I picked up the Bible because God wanted me to finish reading the verse I had read earlier that evening, where it says, husbands, love your wives. And then the last part of that verse says, and be not bitter against them. Of all the things that could be said, why those words? Because then after that it goes on and talks about other things, but he says, husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. Could it be that God knew that that was going to be one of the problems that men were going to have to deal with? So he specifically addresses that. Be not. And I could see bitterness was coming out of me. And it struck me deep. I had to ask my wife to forgive me. I had to ask God to forgive me. I had to, deal with how ashamed I felt. And I realized more and more that we respond so many times because of the wounds that we have. And there are things that happen within our lives and things that happen that cause that wound to be exposed, to cause that wound to be reopened, cause that scab that we think is finally healing, but it's not, to be scraped off again, and it bleeds afresh. And even though the wounder is someone that in our past, we start to take it out on those around us who have irritated that wound presently. Because they're the ones that are available, they're the ones that are close, they're the ones that are near us. And everybody knows what it's like to be around someone that's wounded. Even though you're there to help them in a physical wound, they get cut or hurt or whatever. Oh, let me help you. Get away, get away. Don't touch. Or try to help a wounded animal. Suddenly they're very defensive by anyone coming close to them. Because you have suddenly become the causer of pain. in any way irritates that wound that we have. And we try to pretend that we're okay. Years ago, there was a book that came out that was the title, I'm Okay, You're Okay. Well, I'm here to tell you, I'm not okay and you're not okay. And I don't mean that in a negative way, because it would be in a negative way if there was no hope. But the whole reason why we're dealing with this subject is so that those who hear, either here or through audio tape or whatever, would come to the understanding that we are all wounded people. Wounded, first of all, by sin. And wounded by those around us that react to their own sinfulness and cause those wounds within us. And no matter how long we've lived with the wound, there is a healer. And His name is Jesus Christ. And He can heal the wound that father caused, that mother caused, that a husband caused, that a wife caused, that whoever it was, a little girl in the 5th grade, whatever it is, God is able to deal with that wound. He's the only one that can. You cannot heal it. That's the second principle in healing the wounded heart. First, you must recognize that you are wounded. Secondly, you must recognize you cannot heal your own wound. You have people going to the Barnes and Noble and the bookstores finding all these books on self-esteem and love yourself and self-discovery and all these things because they're trying to somehow find something that will work. Something that will substitute their father saying, I'm proud of you. Something that will be a substitute of the acceptance of those that they love. They can't find it in a book. They can't find it in just achievements and success. The book that I'm reading right now, Wild at Heart, the author, John, mind just went blank. It'll come to me. But John, my friend John, he tells a little story in there about his son as they were going mountain climbing. He was teaching his son, he's a mountain climber, and he was teaching his son how to climb these little, rock formations close to their house. And his son was climbing and he had everything, all the ropes and everything. He's going, and he came to this portion where the ledge kind of comes out. You got to go out and over. And his son wasn't being able to do it. So being a father, like most fathers, he was concerned. He said, well, don't worry about it, son. You'll get it next time. His son is gripped onto those things. Tears are stinging his eyes. And he says, Dad, I got to do it. So he realized how important that was for him. So he said, okay. So he started instructing him. And he's reached out. And he said, put that clamp there. And, all the things that he had to do. And he finally made it over. And when he got, and he's making his way up. And he was encouraging, that's good. You're doing great, son. You're a wild man. After he made it to the top and they were all done. And they got everything cleaned up. And they're on their way home. His son looks up to him and says, Dad, was I really a wild man? That's the thing that was important to him. The validation of his father, of his masculinity, of his capability. Every boy needs that. Every man needs that when he's a boy. And most don't get it. And they spend their whole life trying to. And so they look and they search and they go into relationships and they think they're made a man by how many conquests they have. They think they're a man because they have all these girlfriends. They do all these different things. Now, I'm using men for an example more than women because I am a man, so I can identify more with that. But you can apply it, women, the way it applies to you. Those needs that are there and how you are trying and attempting to fill those voids and those needs. The validation. Why does a woman pick the wrong guy over and over again? There's a certain need she's trying to meet. There's some kind of validation she's trying to receive. And she thinks it's here, and maybe this guy will have, maybe this person, maybe that person. And can you imagine how that is compounded when someone is looking for a marriage to be the answer to their personal needs, and then it falls apart? Nobody wins. Children who are caught up in a divorce, who already have these needs and these feelings that they have that they're not good enough and all that. Their immediate, that's why the studies that are done, they say that when there is a divorce, the children always blame themselves. If I was a better son, if I was a better daughter, if I got better grades, if I cleaned up my room, if I did this, if I was just better, this wouldn't have happened to my family. You think, well, why would they blame themselves? It's not their fault. But when you already have the wounds there, you see things completely different. Your perception is distorted. Everything is filtered through the wound. So your responses are according to the wound, not according to what has been said to you. See, the negative hurts and the positive hurts sometimes too. Because you always think they have ulterior motive. You always think that they're just... So you try to compensate with other things. Men get involved in dangerous things to show that they're men. They have to have the female conquest, to show that they're men. They have to talk rough and be tough and do all those things to show they're trying to gain something, that they're trying to be validated in that way. And even though there are other guys that say, oh man, he's tough and he's this and whatever, it doesn't do it for them. Because the only one that can bring healing is the one that caused the wound, which almost never happens. I'm the healer of wounds. This is Jesus Christ. And you'll look in the life of Jesus, His ministry to people, you will see He always responded to wounded people. And He spoke harshly to those who tended to be the wounders, which in this case were the religious Pharisees. They were always wounded people. They were always saying, you're not good enough. You're not as good as me. God can't love you. As we close this teaching this morning, I want you to focus on the first principle that we mentioned. To being healed, that is recognizing you're wounded. Until that happens, you can't move forward. You first have to admit to yourself that you're wounded. And admitting that wound, you have to expose that wound. That's the hardest thing in the world to do. And the thing about this subject we're addressing today is I'm not looking, even though God can and He may heal some wounds even here this morning. But for a lot of us, it's going to be a period of time because they didn't happen overnight. Some of us have been carrying these wounds for years and years and years. And I believe God does purposely so many times bring healing to our lives in such a way that it is done in a way that we can comprehend what is happening and that we are ready to receive that. It's a progressive thing. That today, most of us need to acknowledge the wound. You may still be wounded when you leave this service today, But you're on your way to healing because you finally have admitted to yourself that you have been wounded. And by doing that, you're opening the door for the healer of wounds to begin the work. The exposure that needs to be to the light of His Word. The exposure to His Spirit that begins to cleanse the wound. You see, it's not a matter of just closing the wound and letting all the junk stay inside of it. He's not into just covering it over or whitewashing it or making it look like it's healed. He's into healing it. So for many this morning, it may be that the only thing that God is asking of you is to admit that you are wounded. Now, He knows. And sometimes some people don't identify it. They know something hurts within. They know they have a desperate need, but they haven't really pinpointed where it came from. You see, that's what recently happened to me. I never associated my father being gone as a bad thing, in the sense that somehow it was a negative on me. My father was a good father. He did not intentionally try to hurt me or abuse me or anything. He didn't. But because he was gone, because he died when I was 6 years old, just his absence created a wound in me. Because I never had a father to say, I'm proud of you. I never had a father to validate my masculinity. I never had that role model. I never had that there. So I've gone without that, and I've tried to fill it with other things. So I attempted to be good at sports so that people would say, wow, you're good at that. And I did that. But it still didn't meet the down deep inside need that I had. Oh, great. It was great to get the compliments. It was great to score high on a game. It was great to be good at those things. But it did not meet the need down deep inside. Because you see, what tends to happen when you're trying to fill it with those things is you tend to always have to have that. I was good at it, and people were always telling me I was good at it. So what did I do? I did more of it. You know? I played and I played and I played and I played and I played because I love people telling me after the game, man, you played a good game. Man, you did a good job. That was a great shot. Whatever it may be. I loved that. I wanted to hear it all the time. Why? Because it made me feel better, but it never healed the wound. So no matter what you choose to try to fill that void, it is only a temporary soothing, but it doesn't heal the wound. It masks it for a while. It may cause it not to seem to hurt so much for a while. It always tends to rear its ugly head in the middle of the night. When you're laying down in bed, when you're facing a crisis, whatever it may be. Facing a difficult situation, and all of a sudden you start questioning yourself. I guess it's just like my dad said, I'm just no good. I guess I'm just not the man I should be. I guess I'm just not the woman I should be. I guess I don't have any value. I guess my parents are, I guess my teacher was right. I guess whoever. Would you stand with me, please? I want us to close this morning, this session, with a time of just allowing those that want to allow their wounds to be exposed to God, not to me. We're not here for you to come and confess your wounds. Now that may come later. Because that may be something that needs to be done. And let me mention here very quickly, because I think people stumble over this. They're struggling with certain things in their life and they want God to bring healing. But because they've heard the testimony of others. And let me use an example that will help you to understand what I'm saying. Say a woman has been abused sexually when she was a child. It comes to the place of recognizing that wound and receiving healing for that wound. And so she testifies of it to others and tells of what happened to her. And it does help others. But God does not ask that of everybody. See, what happens sometimes is another woman in the same situation hears her testimony and thinks, I want that healing just like she received. But she thinks, but if I get the healing, then I've got to tell everybody what happened to me. And it frightens her to think she has to do that because she's been healed. That's not true. Look how many times Jesus healed people and said, go your way and don't tell anybody. God knows each of us, and He knows each of our needs. And I believe God does want to heal needs that we have in our lives, and in healing those needs, it's not for the purpose of somehow putting you up there. If God lays it on your heart to share it, that's great. But if He doesn't, you're under no obligation to have to do that. God's not so needy of someone to brag on Him that He's going to force you to do that. He's going to do what is best for you. So please never think that as you allow God to work in your life, that somehow the exposing of those things in your life that need to be healed are going to demand of you that you share it before the church or, suddenly have to share it with everyone and tell of all the things that happened to you. I thank God for those that are able to do that, and that God has called to do that. But I don't believe God calls every person to do that. But I want everyone, for just a moment, just to bow your head and close your eyes. And those who may be hearing this by audio tape, you can also close your eyes and bow your head. If you're driving in your car, pull over somewhere, get off the freeway. Pull in the parking lot. You sense right now in your spirit, even if those do here in this auditorium, that we are in His presence. And right now, all He needs of you, all He wants of you, is to say, Father, I realize I'm wounded. I realize I'm wounded. I've been carrying this hurt all of my life. I don't want it to hurt anymore. But like so many times when we minister to our wounds, there comes a little bit of pain before the healing begins. To clean the wound. A little bit of aching, a little bit of feeling of those same emotions you've had, the same anger that rises up, the same shame that wants to surface again. All those things begin to come back. We tend to want to just push them all back down again, but don't do that. God is going to bring all that is needed and necessary to help you cope with those feelings. Father, I pray as each one has responded to your word, each one that is hearing my voice has responded to say, yes, there's a wound in my life. And as of this moment, I ask God to help me expose that wound to Him. I admit, and you can just in your own heart pray to God right now and say, I admit, Lord, that I have a wound. Or I have wounds, Father. You know when they happen. You know what they are. People who love me hurt me. People who should have taken care of me and protected me. And it's caused these hurts within me, these wounds. And I acknowledge them there today, Father. And I acknowledge them because I know you are the healer of wounds. And at this moment you are beginning my healing of my wounds. And you are going to do all that is needed to bring healing to me. In Jesus' name. Remember this, the question is not if He will heal us. The question is when the timing is right. When God takes us through that process and does what needs to be done within us. I truly believe by the end of this series, there's going to be some wonderful healings take place in some hearts. We might not see the difference necessarily in the others because we have all learned to mask our feelings real good. But the person that's healed will know the difference. They'll know the difference the next time they go through a hard time. They know the difference the next time someone says something and it doesn't pierce their heart like it used to. They'll know the difference because of the way they feel about themselves. There's no longer the hindrance to accept the love that they felt they didn't deserve before, but now the love is freely received that God has for us. That's why God wants to heal the wounds, because they hinder His love from being received. He pours it upon us, but those wounds cause us to push it away. So God's going to bring healing. So every one of us can receive His love. And we can find wholeness in Him. Amen.